Religious content is exploding all over social media. Religious rhetoric is becoming mainstream enough again that you can develop entire political campaigns around it. And people are once again genuinely improving their lives and finding meaning through religion. That's the first thing we need to acknowledge before we do any analysis, that there is a real cultural shift here. Regardless of your opinions of the truth or reasons as to why this is the case, that much we should agree on. Now, I could analyze this from maybe an interesting or psychological social commentary angle, but what would you actually gain from that? Instead, I want to explain why I think this was actually inevitable and how actually every change we see in a person or a society comes from pain and not a quest for truth. Let me explain what I mean, okay? Modern society has failed us. That's a common sentiment today. I don't even care whether it's true or not. That's not the purpose of this video. Of course, we can look at it through economic depression, emotional depression, the fall of society, and we can try and explain, we can try and connect the dots and explain like the cause of this. But just the fact that that exists as a sentiment, I think, is what is the important point for the discussion we're having about religion. Because I think anyone at any time is actually only ever in one of two modes of cognition: animal mode and human mode. Let's be honest, when you're in animal mode, you don't give a fuck about religion or philosophy or deep intrinsic thoughts about the universe. Sport is a really clear example of this. Sport is very dynamic and your brain is doing a lot of things when you play a sport. It's very primal, psychologically speaking. When you're playing football, for example, you're not questioning the rules of football themselves. You're not doing deep reflection or analysis about anything because there is too much input to do that. It's the equivalent of when you're running from the saber-toothed tiger in a primal sense, you're not thinking about anything else but running from the saber-toothed tiger. And this relates to what I was talking about, because if you reduce the amount of time that you are in animal mode, then you inevitably have to go back into human mode. And what I mean by animal mode and human mode is simply that animal mode is just primal, it's instinctual, there is no real deep reflection and thinking that you are doing. Whereas human mode is the opposite. Human mode is, you can imagine it as the kind of framework you're in when you're alone right before bed and you're kind of just, your mind is wandering about literally anything and everything. So historically, what did people do when they weren't actively hunting or gathering food or resources, etc.? Literally nothing. I shit you not. Today it sounds unproductive or something, but most of human history literally consists of just sitting around a campfire, telling stories, painting on caves, or just looking at the stars. That is what we did. And we need to understand that we're still experiencing all of the world through the internalized frameworks that we've built up in our mind. That's not deep or philosophical or sophisticated, it's just basic human psychology. And actually what that means is that we have so much more agency and freedom than we realize in the choices we make, the actions we take, and the way we see the world around us. Most people don't even realize that those frameworks exist because they've internalized them so deeply. It's the same way that an animal doesn't explicitly think about the modes of cognition that it is in and whether it's doing any particular thing at any time. It's simply responding to deeply internalized frameworks such as intuition, which are not mystical, but they are extremely complex. Humans can do both. That is the beauty of our species. But remember what I said about pain. Okay, when societal frameworks don't cause pain, there is no reason to question them. People don't care, you revert back to animal mode. So school to university to job to house to kids, etc. When there is a clear progression and the framework works in your mind, then there is no reason to do any reflection or thinking or meta-awareness or analysis. But when that breaks down, you know, AI replacement, unaffordable housing, etc., that model starts to break down and people start to question the frameworks they are using and they try and replace them with new ones. This is the key thing. When the frameworks break down, like, people know this, okay? Where hard times make you question things. But the thing that people don't question is whether they need to actually find a new framework to replace their worldview in a holistic sense, or whether those frameworks themselves are simply constructed. So the mistake would be conflating the two things. Let me be a bit more clear here. So for example, the pursuit of money and wealth versus the pursuit of having like a nuclear family. What most people do is the comparison of looking at, oh, but this one is shallow and this one is deep because of, and then they can't go any further with the reasoning there. Because at some point, you can't concretely prove either direction. You have to look at either framework or system that you use and realize that there are some deeply And then there are some like deep philosophical assumptions that you have to make about a system, and it's going to be subjective at some level always, every time. There is no one deepest answer, there is no one fundamental framework. So at most what you can do is acknowledge that these are just ideas that someone else has developed at some point. That at some level the assumptions will be subjective. That's just how logic and rationality has to work. In mathematics, for example, you can make a logical argument and it can be quite concrete and objective and rigorous, but strip it back to its core axioms, and those axioms need to, at some level, just be decided. There are things that you simply just need to say, this is going to be the case, and there is no way I can prove that to be true any further. Once you do that, you gain extreme autonomy and agency of every single thought that you have, because you're no longer looking for an all-encompassing framework that has some kind of objective truth claim. You're instead asking, what specific thing do I want to do at any specific time? What assumptions are going to help me do that? And then what is the mental framework that I'm going to use in that scenario? I don't know if that was too abstract and philosophical. The point is, we had to see a return of religion because the frameworks that people have been using are starting to break down. And my point is, we shouldn't conflate our frameworks of reality by taking one that has now broken down and replacing it with another one that we think is going to be all-encompassing. And instead, all of them are subjective at some level, and we have complete control over everything we decide and think of.